In this video, I'll tell you where to find really cool three-dimensional terrain files for you to use in your 3D printer. So back this last summer, I did a video, actually a couple of videos, about 3D printing and how they relate to wargaming. If you want to see the 3D printing video, you can check it out. Pachow. But one of the things I talked about was just about the actual act of having a 3D printer, what kind of stuff to look for, and that kind of stuff. In that video, I talked about a website called Thingiverse, which is a place where you can go to get free STL files. STL files are the types of files. It's a three-dimensional file that you get that you then can use to make 3D terrain, in our case, as wargamers. If you're just into 3D printing in general, there's STL files for every last little thing out there. You know, any kind of, you looking to make any kind of part, any kind of cool little statue, any kind of pretty much anything. Brackets for stuff, whatever. They're all out there on Thingiverse. I found a cool piece of terrain. It's a they call it a Texas barrier sometimes. Jersey barriers are those cement barriers you see on the side of the highway. They're kind of short and long. Texas barriers are tall and sort of narrower, and they make more of a wall than a car barrier, something a person could stand behind. I found a set of 5 of them on Thingiverse, free file, and some of them are got gunshots in them, some of them are completely crumbled, and I've printed out a bunch of them on my printer, and they're really kind of cool. They're a lot of fun. They make a great little addition to your wargaming table. The thing about Thingiverse is that those files are all free. People made them, put them there, and didn't expect anything in return, which is nice. It's altruistic. But they're not always great files. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but when you want to say, well, now I only want to see the wargaming stuff, that's a small portion of the whole overall Thingiverse kind of collection. And then the stuff that we find on Thingiverse is not necessarily the greatest sometimes. Some of it's really cool, and it's all free pretty much, but it's not all the greatest. However, a kind of a little cottage industry of companies that create the 3D files that you can then print so that you can find cool stuff to print, for the tabletop and everything, pieces of terrain. This little cottage industry has cropped up. There's 3 of them that I've been kind of interacting with. One I met at Gen Con, and others that have just kind of back and forth through hearing things and emails and this and that. And what these companies do, is they produce the STL files. And they don't just produce like, oh, I sort of made a thing and now here you can buy it. No, I sort of made some other weird little thing and here you can grab it. They make sets. They make a lot of different, themed sets that work together. So you can sometimes just buy, oh, I just like this one little piece. But a lot of times you're paying for a whole bunch of like dungeon tiles, which once you get the STL files, you can put them into your slicer software, which will then make the G code, which is the special code that you then usually, in most situations, put onto either a thumb drive or an SD card, plug into your 3D printer, and then tell it to print. And you can print. The upside to doing it this way, to getting the STL files, really nice high-end STL files, and then printing your own stuff, is you can print as many as you want. You want to print 100, you can do it. If you're going to try to cover an entire 4x8 table with cool dungeon tiles, you can do that. You bought the dungeon tiles. They do not have you can only print this twice. You can print it as many times as you want. That's the whole point. The 3 companies that I've been looking at their stuff are Printable Scenery, Rocket Pig, and Warlayer. This is something I printed yesterday. I'm going to show you a close-up picture of it here. But it's kind of a corner piece in a sort of a dungeon sort of sewer thing. I'm not gonna lie to you. This took about 15 hours to print. I mean, it took a good long time. If you wanted to cover a 4x8 table in dungeon tiles, you can do it. You can do it much more cheaply than if you were to buy those pre-made, kind of cool, pre-painted modular dungeon things that you see sometimes at the big conventions. Those things are great, but they're really expensive. These are a lot cheaper, but it'll take a long time. If you wanted to cover a 4x8 table in cool dungeon tiles, it would take you probably 6 months printing. Maybe not. Maybe you got a much faster printer than mine. That's cool. This one took me 15 hours, and this is not even set on super high settings. This is set on like normal settings in the slicer. But it is a really cool little, it's got little cracks in the stone here, and it's a nice curve to it. It's nice and sturdy. I mean, I cannot break this thing. I can't even make a crack. It is sturdy, yet also quite light. The companies that do this make all kinds of different types of things. You see a lot of kind of fantasy or medieval type buildings, and that's partially because I find that when I print those in 3D, they have a tendency to look a little bit more natural. How am I trying to say this? When I print something that's supposed to be really nice and smooth, shiny metal, sci-fi building walls, the act of printing, making those little back and forth slices as it prints and prints and prints, it kind of comes across sort of weird and ridged. But when you use something like this that's got little kind of uneven bricks and all that stuff, you don't notice it nearly as much. Now, obviously, this is just the white filament. I'm going to do a video in the future about how to paint stuff that has been 3D printed and talk about that. And so you'll see more of this piece and probably some others when I get to that. There will be some prep. There will be some sanding. There will be some other things you have to do. You can't just take the pieces directly out of the printer and then start using them. But you do have a lot of different choices out there for 3D printed shapes. You may have been thinking about 3D printing and going, well, that's really cool, but these Thingiverse things, I looked through the catalog and it's a bunch of free stuff. And it's sort of. But when you start looking at some of these other websites, and there are more than just these three, those are just the three that I've had contact with. Again, like I said, Printable Scenery, Rocket Pig, and Warlayer. I'll put links down below in the description. There's a lot of really cool stuff that they've designed, both for sci-fi stuff, fantasy stuff, historical stuff, things that go from modular dungeon terrain where the tiles are designed to all stick together so you can make whatever kind of stuff, to scatter terrain, barrels and crates and things like that, ruined buildings, not ruined buildings, all kinds of different parts. And you have all these different things that are available to you. You buy the file, they send it instantly. So you want to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning in your underwear, knock yourself out. There's no shipping, there's none of that stuff. You get these files, you now have them. You make the slicing, with your slicing software, which if you've been 3D printing, you've got slicing software. It's kind of a necessity. And then from there, you just crank them out. Like, I could easily see myself if I wanted to make a whole bunch of parts. Now, I wouldn't need a whole bunch of corners probably, but let's say I needed to make, if I decided on my layout and I needed maybe 7 of those corners, I could get those all done easily in a week because, like I said, it takes about 15 hours. So I could start printing when I get up in the morning before going to work, and before going to bed, I'd be able to pull it off of the thing and it'd be all set. That kind of stuff, and your sizes may vary. Obviously, things that are bigger will take longer. Things that are smaller will take less time. Those 5 Texas barriers, when I print those, they only take about 5 to 6 hours tops. There's a lot out there that you can do, and if you just look at some of the free options, because you aren't necessarily a designer, and I get that. I'm not particularly a designer, though I'm starting to mess around with the 3D software, and I'll do another video about that coming up soon. If you want to find really well done stuff, there are now companies that you can go to. You can buy the files from them, get them, and then crank out as much stuff as you want, which at that point, you can go from saying, okay, well, I bought this machine and I'm going to see how it works and kind of go from there, and maybe I can make some cool terrain down the road, to saying, I really like what this person has done with this piece of terrain in this file that I can see, on their website. I'm going to buy a copy of it, and then I'm going to print out a whole bunch of them. There's no reason you couldn't just print, you could print a couple for your board and maybe print some for a friend or something like that. You can print them maybe for your local store. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different options. But you have now those options to be able to find the really cool looking designs, really interesting stuff, again, for sci-fi, for fantasy, a whole bunch of different stuff. And it really opens up your possibilities for what you can produce to make your gaming table look really, really good.